What we are going to be talking about actually is books today. Susan is giving the presentation, Dr. Susan Schneider. She maintains this list of books that are her favorite climate change books and environmental sustainability. And so what she's going to be doing in this talk will highlight some of the that deserve special attention. And addressing climate change can understandably seem overwhelming. Activists benefit from the insights of experts across the large range of relevant disciplines, a great way to attain perspective and help prioritize action. And now I will turn it over to Susan to talk about these books and to see how that helps us to be better activists.
Thank you very much, Nikki. I have a number of climate change credentials. I work in the field. I'm an academic, and I've been following climate change since the late 1980s when Jim Hansen testified for Congress and Bill McKibben wrote the landmark book, The End of Nature, the first book for the public about climate change. So it's added up over the years. At this stage, I've read hundreds of climate change and sustainability books, and for many years now, I have been maintaining this annotated list of about 50 to 60 of my favorites over the previous decade. I update it about every 2 months. Right, so I'm going to be focusing on other books and mainly from the last 6 to 7 years. And the way I formatted this today is I'll start out with a top 3, and then I'll present some books from different specialty areas, and then we can have a Q&A. And for those of you interested in the current list, it is the February update. You can always find it on the website for my own book, Science of Consequences. There's only one webpage that features climate change, and it's the link is always right near the top there. Or I created a QR code for anyone who wants to kind of follow along here as I discuss some of these books. Okay, 2 weeks ago, when we did the Fridays for Future, where a number of us presented on our favorite recent books, I talked about this one. So, of course, it's going to appear again, but because a lot of you were on that call, I'm not going to be talking about it other than a real brief summary right now. This was my top pick. This is a book that alternates optimistic chapters with more pessimistic chapters, best of times, worst of times, like in the title. And it is, according to my little summary here in my list, a brilliant, readable work of scholarship, one of the best looks at the bigger picture that I've seen. Yeah, it's very well documented. He did a lot of research for the book, but it's still readable and just gives a great bigger picture kind of analysis. Again, alternating hope with pessimism. And that's all I'll say about it for today. I'm going to be spending a bit more time on this book, which is pessimistic. There's just no two ways about it. This is a book that is just focused, despite the title, on the global electric power system. And as many of us on this call know, renewable energy now is the cheapest form of energy around the world, almost without exception. So that's great that it's low cost. As Brett Christophers goes to some length to show, unfortunately, this sometimes doesn't matter when you look at what actually gets built, because what matters is profits, not cost. This is a very difficult book to slog through. I have to warn you right from the get-go. I think it's a very important book. However, this is a very complicated system we're talking about worldwide, the way that power operates. At this stage, it turns out, even in the communist countries, that a lot of the power generation is privatized. So that's run on a strictly profit-based approach there, whereas maintenance and the grid and all of that is often some weird combination. So the upshot is that our electric power systems, not just in this country, but around the world, are extremely complex and sometimes, frankly, don't make a whole lot of sense. It's just the way things worked politically, the way that they turned out. They're extremely arcane, and Brett Christophers goes deep into the weeds around the world to show how, unfortunately, while renewables certainly are growing for electric power, generation, they're not growing as fast as we need them to, and some of the obstacles are of serious concern in terms of meeting the IPCC goals, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change goals for cutting greenhouse gas emissions in this really critical sector. So some of the reasons I've got listed here, the mixed motives problem, for example, even though new renewables are so cheap, they do still often require government support to be viable, in part because of the way that the markets are set up, in part because of other factors entirely. Christopher's gives all kinds of examples to illustrate his points, where it's working, where it isn't, what the huge range of barriers are. Privatization is another one. He notes that, in fact, the UK now is renationalizing transmission, which they had privatized because that was causing too many problems. And we need big finance to be part of this. Their rules are critical too. The author is a Swedish professor of economic geography, which I never knew that was a thing, but wow, he certainly knows what he's talking about. Has a lot of great documentation. He's written about other aspects of the finance industry. And for those of you who do not want to slog through this, again, I got to warn you, I think it's an important book, but it is a difficult read. There's not only the short, good review in The Guardian, the Sierra Club gives it a fairly long review, and I'm going to take a second to let you read this quote, two quotes from that review, and then The Nation gives the longest and most detailed review. Okay, then, going on. This is a quick footnote to that. I'll let you read this quote. Probably everyone on this call, I'm guessing, knows Paul Hawken's edited book, Drawdown, which was a huge bestseller in 2017, very well known in the climate community. This is the much less well-known sequel to that book, which is also good. I think not as good as Drawdown, so if you haven't read either of them, I recommend starting with Drawdown rather than this one. But this is a great quote, I think. Again, putting things in perspective. And the third book out of my top three is an optimistic book because, hey, folks, we need hope. Mary DeMacher absolutely gets the urgency of the climate crisis and the need for action, but this is an inspiring, funny book. You wouldn't think climate change could be funny. Yep, she manages it. It is inspiring. She has such good examples. She covers the whole range of things people can do. This is emphatically not just for parents. I am recommending it to people all the time. Back in 2017, I co-founded and co-chaired a climate action coalition in the Central Valley of California, where I was living at the time. Thereby, I see beating the the Climate Crisis Coalition here by 2 years. We started in 2017, and right from the get-go with our tabling, this is the book we were featuring at our events. You know, making this book available at cost or even a bit below so that it would get out there in the hands of as many people as possible. To this day, I give it away at my talks. And in fact, I gave a climate talk to Pierce Cedar Creek in Hastings at the end of February this year. just a month ago. And one of the people who attended that talk saw this recommendation and bought the book and loved it, and snagged me after our last electric vehicle nonprofit chapter meeting a week and a half ago and said, yeah, this is a great book. I'm really enjoying it. And this is the comment I get all the time. Mary DeMacher just did a brilliant, brilliant job. Yeah, please get it for everyone you know. This will help bring people on board and get them doing all kinds of things, including activism, lobbying. I mean, yeah, you name it. Again, it's just really outstanding. Okay, going to then more special topics. Uh, I've read a number of histories of climate change research and action. This one really stands out for me, and as you can see from those awards at the bottom, or finalist for this really prestigious award from PEN. Yeah, a lot of other people think so too. There's so many great climate change and sustainability books out there, and of course, I only read a small fraction, and only a small fraction get New York Times reviews. This one made that cut, and absolutely deservedly. Nathaniel Rich talked to a bunch of people when he was putting the book together. This book covers the 1980s, particularly the late 1980s, which it turns out is a period when we got very close to an international accord on climate change, much like the 1987 accord on the ozone layer. That was a multi-year negotiation process culminating in the Montreal Accord in 1987. So that was pretty much an example for what a number of international players wanted for climate action. Those of us who've been following this know that, and I'll be talking about this at the very end, that the fossil fuel industry has known that climate change was real since they commissioned detailed reports from their own scientists in the 1970s. So in the 1980s, various politicians and scientists and fossil fuel company leaders, yes, they were in on this, got together and tried to work out a deal. And this is the story told in this book. It's just a short book. It is so fascinating. I mean, no one in the general public had any idea at the time that this was going on. And the culmination was in the late 1980s during the administration of George Bush Sr., George H.W. Bush, right? And again, the climate change, the fossil fuel companies were on board with this because they could see what a threat climate change was going to be to their business model. They wanted to be part of shaping the transition, right? It makes sense. And so they were on board at this time. And a lot of people worked hard to make this happen. And I don't want to share too many spoilers here, but I can tell you one person high in the Bush administration was one of the people who was critical in shooting it down, tragically for all of us. But yeah, well worth a read if you have any interest in the history. And I think we can learn from this because at some point, you know, we will get together again, more so even given current politics in this country, you know, and hopefully improve on the Paris Accord. And yeah, and of course, the way we're going to do that is through policy. So I've got 3 books I'm going to cover on policy. This one gets pride of place. It is relatively short, but it's readable. And look at the credentials. Lonergan is a hedge fund manager. I mean, how many hedge fund managers get it about climate change? I mean, more than I'm guessing, I probably, but still, this is a guy who has an Oxford bachelor's and advanced degree from the London School of Economics. That's the LSE, and Sawyer's actually worked for the UN. And this is a book that's wonky in places, but overall quite readable. It's not full of charts and tables like the next book I'm going to talk about, you know. So even people for whom that's intimidating are going to find this relatively accessible, I think. The format is really clever. It's a dialogue between Eric and Corinne about how we do the policy changes that we need. Okay, they really like positive incentives. They've got lots of examples. They talk about how best to communicate, emphasize the benefits. They do go into some wonky detail. For example, export credit agencies. Okay, and please do not ask me about these in the Q&A. Okay, I'd have to look it up, but I remember being struck by how innovative a global financing approach this was, and how successful it had been in some places. A number of other innovative ideas are shared. They do like carbon taxes, but they want them to be nuanced and targeted. And they go into detail on that. They like tax exemptions. This little factoid here about global wealth, I think, is very helpful. All of the huge amount of assets in the ground for fossil fuel companies, of course, is a big worry for them. But as a proportion of global wealth, it's still really minor. And since all of us on this call are activists to some extent, you gotta love the focus on that in this book. And the final sentence of the book is, if you actually want to make a difference, become an activist. Yay. And Sawyer's herself co-founded a nonprofit. This book is based in part on the third book I'm going to cover in this policy category, which is Mark Jacquard's book. But before we get to that, okay, this book is wonky. It really is outstanding, I think, and it's got lots of tables and graphs. If you like tables and graphs, then you're going to love this book. I'm not going to take the time to go into detail because I want to cover some other standout books in other areas, but I think this is a really important quote from this book. This point about involving industry and planning is really critical. And again, like carbon pricing, but wants it to be nuanced and goes into a lot of detail about that. Overall, this is also not a really long book. For those of you, who don't want to cover like 400 pages on wonky, finance and economic stuff, it's certainly doable. And I want to spend some time on this book. Uh, Mark Jacquard was originally an academic who got drawn in because of climate change to play an absolute leading role in our neighbor to the north, Canada, and their effort to address climate change. And I want to start from the get-go here before I go into more detail. That Canada, like the US, currently has one of the highest per capita greenhouse gas emission levels in the world. That's, per person per year. We're at about the same level. And Canada, like the US, is a major fossil fuel producing country, which has meant a lot of very challenging politics, like it has in this country. In some states and provinces, more than others. So Jacquard created the carbon pricing program for British Columbia back in the 1990s and was able to help get that through. And at one point was on a nationwide commission for what can be done on climate change. He's an expert both on taxes and on cap and trade approaches. And the more liberal parties in Canada tried hard to get carbon fee and dividend. And like I've been involved with Citizens Climate Lobby for many years, like I know some of you on this call. That's one of our big things there, where you don't paint it as where you go out of your way to paint it as not a tax and something where everyone, especially lower income people, get the return from it, the fee then, and it's, kind of a win-win kind of thing. And unfortunately, as he goes into great detail on, of course, the Conservative Party still paints it as a tax. So you tend to have this yo-yo phenomenon where, okay, first you have the tax, but you can't get it high enough politically, and then the Conservatives get in, and then they eliminate it entirely, etc. Rinse and repeat, basically. Yeah. So this guy not only talks the talk, he is an energy economist, right? That was his academic home. He walks the walk here. In 2012, he was arrested and actually spent some time in jail protesting a coal train. So totally gets it, despite this somewhat optimistic title for his book, right? Climate Success. And certainly Canada has had some success. Uh, um, Overall, I've got to say that this is a real politics from someone who was in these bruising battles in our neighbor to the north. And I don't know how many of you are aware, but once again, even though now it's looking better for liberals after what's happened in this country, right? Of course, Trudeau had to step down. They're having their economic issues too in Canada, but um, Canada has just ended its its carbon tax. The rate is going to zero next week on April 1st. This is so sad. But yeah, but it is what it is. We got to deal with it. And so anyone who wants to know behind the scenes for carbon taxes and carbon cap and trade, Mark Jacquard has been there, a leader through it all. Okay, I'll spend a bit less time on the rest of the books then. This one is a hopeful book again, right? I'm trying to alternate here. Are you seeing the pattern? Because there really is cause for hope, folks. And this book is all about the future job market, current and future, and transition to a sustainable economy, not just the US, although that's the main focus. Justine Burt does a great job covering a lot of ground in all different kinds of industries, looking at who's going to lose jobs and how you can help them transition. Um, from my description in my annotated list there, okay. Oh, and by the way, I've got another quote from Jacquard if anyone wants that from the book about his efforts. Okay, but the Great Pivot, a very practical focus, shifting the US economy. You have to address job losses. You need green jobs and training. Many useful tables and graphs. How do we finance this transition? She even includes costs for implementing better bike infrastructure like we've been doing in Kalamazoo, right? Means of financing, what's worked, what hasn't. Current apps. She has a consulting firm, so she's been actually helping different industries with the transition. Really good book, really hopeful book. I've read a number of books about effects of sea level rise around the world. Again, so unfair. Developing nations did not cause this problem, and they're ground zero, like Bangladesh that I talked about in my talk last week at Western for international climate challenges and successes, right? So how are developing and developed nations alike coping with this? Okay, this book came out in 2017. It's not hot off the presses, but as of 2017, wow, he finds really great examples for successes and failures, what we can learn from these developed and developing nations, and human interest stories. So those of us in the book club recently read his article about heat waves, right? The heat will kill you first. If you like that book, you're going to love this book. I think he does a good job with the research, and it's a very readable book. And there is certainly a lot of cause for hope here with examples in Europe, especially, of how their adaptation approaches are really clever and innovative in some cases, having parks where it's low-lying, where you plan for this to be inundated, basically, and you put in the right kind of vegetation there, and you develop around it then. And again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? We can learn from successes. Okay, we've done a number of great economics books in the book club, like Donut Economics. I'm not going to talk about that. I don't think we did this one in the book club, though. I really like this one. It covers the critical role of big finance as well as having advice for ordinary people. The great transition to renewables and sustainability is going to require huge amounts of capital, right? As recognized in all the climate policy books. And so how do we make that happen? He breaks down various different private sources and matches different levels of risk, shares the successes, and there are a lot of them, including for developing nations, like I talked about in my presentation last week, and what's the path forward. And then this book, oops, this book, really valuable. This is a somewhat wonky book. I gotta warn you again. It's laser focused on the financial side. Some chapters are fairly challenging reads. However, it is a short book. It's monetary and fiscal policy, and again, goes into the weeds a bit. What's the history? Who's the heroes? Who's the villains? We need to target the industries and the people who have the highest carbon footprints. It does cover environmental justice issues in the global south, as well as the poor in the north. So that one is highly recommended. And I've read a number of books on this topic. Has anyone else in this group read one that got a lot of press, I think, called Diet for a Hot Planet, which is an older book? So I don't think that's on my list anymore, but I thought that was really well done. This book basically takes up the mantle of that book. This is not about becoming vegan for individuals, although there's some discussion of those kinds of topics. This is about food systems, our agriculture, our corporate America and our processed food industry and all this, and carbon footprints and how we can move toward sustainable food systems. Really well done, really thoughtful, I think, very readable. Covers a lot of different topics. So very nicely done. Recommended. Okay, in this book, look, 2011. Okay, so it came out many, many years ago. As far as I know, this is the only book that just focuses on bottled water and all the ins and outs. There's a lot of them, and I include it now because this is, I tell you, when I'm in a grocery store, I have to close my eyes when I go past that freaking aisle with all the bottled water. It's just so sad on so many levels because bottled water has a huge carbon footprint. The quality of the water is often lower than for tap water in all the areas that it's sold. And I'm not even gonna, Anyway, anyone who wants to know all the details, this is a great expose. Obviously, it's dated at this stage, but the basics still apply, and so it's a really good book. Yeah, please help spread the word. Try not to buy bottled water. Reusables are the way to go. And my next to final slide here, then. This is an area I have worked in myself professionally. I worked for a nonprofit in behavioral sustainability, doing like community level projects. So getting a whole local business, a local school district, a neighborhood, a healthcare system, etc., right? Local businesses, of course, getting an organization to go green in some fashion. You could really have an impact there. It helps build from the ground up toward the higher level policy changes we need, and really does have significant impact. And as far as I know, and I ought to know, again, I work in this area, right? There's some good books for professionals, and I co-authored 2 chapters, and one of them that came out in 2022 when I worked for that nonprofit. It's a 500-page guidebook. It is not for the public. Yeah, it's on, designing and implementing these kinds of sustainable organizational projects, where you're getting people to take green transport, carpool, and stuff like that, for example. Be energy efficient. I mean, all the things that we need to do, right? So it's a great book, but it's not for the public. There's a smaller version from a competitor. I think ours is better. But again, it's not for the public, it's for practitioners. The closest that we come on my list to sharing information about all these successful community level projects is the Democker book, because that's one of the, she has a number of examples of this is what you can do, just your own family, in your own community. But it's certainly not the main focus. And so I'm going to just quickly mention what I did in my last Fridays for Future talk, which is this freely available to all website that I'm affiliated with, full disclosure here, on a pro bono basis. I serve on the Landmark Committee for Climate Change, and this is one of them, actually, this app. This website that's been around since the whole millennium, since the late 90s, gives you all the information you need to replicate community-level successes for sustainability and public health. And this is an example, Flash Food, for addressing the problem of food waste and reducing it. It's an app that's been quite successful. We could get this here in Kalamazoo. You know, communities like Kalamazoo have this and all the information you need. And so that's the closest thing I can think of, frankly. And there's other networks sharing information like this, but there's really no book. There needs to be. Um, Okay, and then my last slide, and this is a book I hope most of us are familiar with. Another book came out at about the same time, covering the same ground. This book documents how the fossil fuel companies knew that climate change was real, but deliberately began a misinformation campaign, just like the tobacco industry knew that their product was, causing serious health problems and killing people, but they also mounted a deliberate misinformation campaign, and both of these all too successful for years, often the same PR firms. You know, the fossil fuel companies used the same PR firms that big tobacco had used. All documented in this book. And again, the competitor may be others since then. And there's been several documentaries based on this book. I know one in Frontline on PBS. So certainly a number of people know this. I can't help thinking, though, that we in the climate action community could maybe do more with this, because people got upset when they heard that the tobacco industry was deliberately lying. And I think if more people knew that the fossil fuel companies have been lying for all these decades, that would help our cause. I don't know, but I can tell you they were very successful from the literature. This is one of the well-known scientific journal articles showing that all this funding of misinformation did succeed in contributing to this polarization in our country about climate change. And this article, which came out a decade ago, now has many hundreds of citations in the literature. Thank you very much for letting me present some of my favorites from my list, and I'm happy to take questions.
So does anybody have any questions? Flash Food is in Kalamazoo, by the way, Susan.
Oh,
At
all
least
right.
Myers does it, and I can't find my my login. I used to do Flash Food, and
All
then
right.
Myers stopped taking pictures, and so when I couldn't see a picture of what was at least in the top layer of the box, I stopped. But that Myers still does Flash Food. The way it worked is that the stores, when things were getting close to their deadline, they would put them into boxes. They sell the box for $5. And so I used to call it my surprise package, because when Myers was taking a picture, I always could see what was on the top layer, but I could never see what was on the bottom layers of these boxes. And now I think they're in shopping bags, but it was always at least $20 worth of food that you got for the $5. A lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, that kind of thing. Sometimes some bakery products. Nothing frozen or anything along those lines, but it was usually the fresh fruit and the bakery items that you got from it.
I can't help but chime in as Myers corporate historian for 9 years that was indeed, a focus. They did sort of go back and forth on it. It had, varied success at different stores, but that, sustainability has always been an important part of that company's, food operations and food retail. And the fact that they are still family owned, they're able to implement programs and projects of that kind, that are in the best interest of the public. And so, yes, thank you for making that point.
I have a question, Susan, since I don't see any hand raised. Let us say I am a high school graduate. I've always thought that climate change was a lot of junk and not real. It's a hoax. But with everything that's been happening, with the tornadoes we've been having, with what, my best friend believes in climate change, what book should I start with?
Oh boy. Yeah. Um, it depends so much. I mean, if it's someone who's questioning whether it's human caused, versus someone who gets it, it's real and just wants to know what they can do. Yeah. I think there's a number of good suggestions on my list. You know, I used to recommend the Union of Concerned Scientists book, Cooler, Smarter. And then there was one like The Rough Guide to Climate Change that helped convince people that it was real. I thought that was really good, but both of those are really kind of out of date now. Does anyone have any suggestions for what they've seen recently? And I'll take a quick look at my list, Nikki, and see if I can come up with any
I
good
was wondering
ideas.
if the parent's guide would work with that or not.
Yeah, I think probably it would, the DeMacher book, yeah. Yeah, although it's not a book aimed at convincing people that climate change is real. It's a book aimed at people who get that it's real and want to take action.
Okay, Mark, you have something?
I thought that Al Gore's book, it is somewhat dated, but it is our choice. Um, it has lots and lots and lots of pictures. It's not dense. So someone who was just getting into it, um, I think it's still a good choice because it covers a lot of policy options and it's just very thorough and not diving deep into any one aspect, but for a thorough coverage of that issue to someone who is newly thinking about it, I think it's still a good choice. I loaned it to an elected official, an incoming elected official at Kalamazoo Township who wanted to know more about this, and I lent it to her.
Okay, good. Yeah, because I would think that there's still a lot of people at that level who really don't believe that it's real or that we cause it, but they're beginning to maybe get an inkling that it is a problem, you know?
Susan, just tacking on to that, I was amazed. I have a lot of climate change books. I have a long shelf, and there was only one book overlap from the ones I
Okay.
have to the ones you listed. So there's a huge, huge number out there, and thank you for giving me some more suggestions, giving all of us.
Thank you, Mark. You know, if they're willing to do some serious reading, Greta Thunberg's edited book, The Climate Book, which we did for the book club, I think, wow, you know, obviously it covers a lot of ground, and it's not really an easy or a fast read. It's a long book with these experts, for those of you who don't know, briefly covering the main points in their own areas of expertise and all different kinds of areas of climate change, the science, and the necessary actions. But I don't know that it would be a good introductory book for someone who just kind of wants to dip in. Yeah, I guess something more like what Mark said, maybe, or again, the DeMacher book, or I'm looking at my list here, Drawdown if they're willing to, because that's got lots of pictures, human interest stories. It has more a focus on things that are working.
Do you have any children's books?
You know, I have, they're not on my list, but I make note of those when I hear about them. I can look them up in one of my climate documents if you like, because there are some good ones out there that I have seen recommended. But some of you who have kids and grandkids, though, maybe would know more about that than I do. I just see the reviews sometimes.
Okay, I was just wondering about books that, for Christmas, for birthdays that are for children that would help to educate it. And so, I'm sorry, I'm gonna mispronounce this. Sakana?
Hi, my name is Sokna. It's really a pleasure to be
Okay.
here. I can never get here on Fridays at noon, and I just happen to have the day off. So this has been just an amazing conversation, even if I came in 20 minutes late. I took lots of screenshots of your books.
Oh,
And I'm really moved to speak right now because I'm actually a doula. So I assist women in labor and families in labor. And I live on Patterson between Westnedge and Park downtown. I'm converting my giant yard into an urban farm, and I'm a clinical herbalist. And something that I'm really, really moved to do in this last year is I rebrand my business because I'm tired of attending births for 20 years. I'm tired. And I love it, but I'm more postpartum now and prenatal. And I love educating whole families on gardening while they're pregnant, because this is when the mothers and fathers here maybe now remember it's a time when we tend to get really, really intimate with the earth and start caring about the products in our homes, become more caring and knowledgeable about how we're eating for the health of our children. So I'd love to get in on that list and maybe we can create it. I don't have very many books here for children, but I definitely know a lot of families and I can ask what they have, and I'm happy to share those books as they come in. But this is such a great time to work with pregnant people planting seeds. They relate it to their own bodies. I'm also an IBCLC, so lactation consultant. They're paying attention to feeding their own children and the food that they're taking into their bodies. And then the children have an automatic knowledge of really seed sovereignty and care if they choose to keep going with it. I'm also a new beekeeper, and I'm getting ready right now to head out to some friends' bees. And, there's a whole thing going on with the bees, and it's so easy to recognize what the issue is. But just want to touch on that comment that you made several books back. We know what the problem is. But as long as people have a personal investment and personal gain, financial gain, they won't make the cautionary moves to protect, even if they're bees. So some bee humor here, but the little beings that are giving us not just honey, but all of our food. It's quite frightening to work with beekeepers who say that they don't know why the bees are dying. I'm one of them who does know why the bees are dying, and I will say it's because they're being abused. And to relate it to our own personal body care is so important and actually so easy. It's something that we can all do. So I am going to link back to you, maybe share in that email if that's a good place, in the general email of the books that I come across for children and families. And I'm going to share some of these books. I do recognize some of them, and when my parents gave them to me. So I'm feeling like now's that nudge for me to read them. And it's a really pleasure to be here, and I'm going to share with more people to come to this group if they can. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you.
All
Yeah.
right.
And I could just comment quickly to write 2 books on my list are The Insect Crisis by Oliver Millman and Silent Earth by Dr. Goulson, that cover some of what she mentioned. Yeah, we have a biodiversity crisis too.
And so any other comments, questions?
I had a
Like-
quick comment, if I might. This is
Sure.
Ken. Yeah, I thank you very, very much, Susan, for this. This is wonderful. I too have a rather significant library of books on the subject. And during my 10 years roughly with Meyer as their corporate historian, I did focus somewhat on food sourcing as a topic and a subject and a theme, and built up a collection in that regard. Also, I'm a specialist in the study of the Great Lakes region, and I emphasized that with the company as well, as they are the largest food retailer, so embedded within the Great Lakes region. But another thing a subject that I don't hear us talk very much about, not us per se, but others that I sort of introduced to the company in my role, was climate justice. They have a pretty well established DEI program there, and they are maintaining that, I'm happy to say, in light of some of the challenges that exist. But I was going to ask you about a book you might recommend. There was one that I found that seemed to be outstanding in that regard, which I assume is familiar to you all, but called The Intersectional Environmentalist. Is that a title that it's written by a woman of color, Leah Thomas, the forwards by a woman of color. And I used it as sort of a book read within the company, to sort of bring leadership together around that topic and theme. And I just wanted to put that out there. I've not heard much about it out there, but it's by far the most outstanding book I was able to find on the subject. And I wondered if you had any other titles, Susan, or anybody else in the group that you would recommend in that regard around the subject of climate justice and, and such.
Yes, Mary Robinson's book on that topic, although I think that's getting a little old at this point. Yeah, a lot of the books on my list touch on it.
Steve said that the intersectional environmentalist was read by Hope for Creation. So, it is being used in Kalamazoo
Oh,
as
great.
an educational book for the environment too.
Excellent. Good to know. Thank you.
So thank you, Susan. This was very informative, great reading list, and I hope everybody enjoyed the comments and got stuff out of this.